Hey everybody, this is Christian, and today we'll follow up on the last video about my HomeLab tour, in which I showed you everything that I'm running at home, including the network architecture, the server equipment, and so on. In this video, I'll focus on the application stack, and just like in the last video, I've created a quick overview for you so that you can see everything that we're going through today. Probably not in all of the details, because then it would become a 2-hour-long video or even more. But yeah, just that you get an idea of all of the applications and platforms that I'm using, categorized by infrastructure environment, including the operating systems and platforms, as well as container orchestration, IoT, network management, monitoring, and AI, because yeah, everybody has to have an AI stack nowadays. And furthermore, I also have a lot of automation tools, code management stuff, app and server management, database, and last but not least, security and identity platforms. As you can see, I went a little crazy with my HomeLab stack, and I'm still not done. Of course, there are many more projects that I'm planning for this year, but let's go through the current stack together. However, before we do that, I also like to talk about effectively managing all of these projects, because if you have such a huge stack in your HomeLab or company environment, you can lose track pretty fast. And managing this in traditional tools like spreadsheets often creates silos, and you lack visibility of the bigger architecture environment. That's why you should use Monday.com, the intuitive all-in-one work platform where you can collaborate effectively with a team, manage complex projects, and automate repetitive tasks. I've recently tested Monday.com to manage some of my HomeLab projects that I just want to keep track of, and it is super simple to use. You can easily create to-do lists for the next actions that you're planning in your projects, create custom fields with additional nodes, manage priorities, or plan timelines. I also absolutely love the Kanban boards that give you a perfect overview of all of this stuff that's going on, but you can also do some pretty cool advanced stuff with Monday.com, like connecting different boards and adding dependencies. And if you're done with a task, you can also add a documentation for it in the Markdown style formatting. Super cool. Of course, Monday.com doesn't only work for personal projects. Actually, it gets more important to use such a platform when you're managing projects in a team. So with a free plan, you get up to 2 seats and 3 boards, unlimited docs, but you can also upgrade to other plans that increase the features. To get started, check out Monday.com using the link in the description box down below and streamline your work like never before. Alright guys, so now let's get into my HomeLab stack, because we have a lot of stuff to cover today. So I will start with the infrastructure management and then just walk my way through this list here. The first item is Proxmox, which is undoubtedly one of the most critical components I use in my HomeLab. And this is the primary virtualization platform that I'm using. As you might have seen in my HomeLab tour, I'm currently running 2 Proxmox nodes in a cluster where all of my virtual machines and containers are running on. My primary Proxmox node, PRX Prod 1, is currently running 2 virtual machines, a server Prod 1 and server Prod 2. The first server is running my main applications container stack, which mostly are just Docker composed projects and many of the applications we are walking through today. And the second server Prod 2 on the first Proxmox node is also running Docker, but here I'm primarily running databases. I thought it was a good idea to separate the application server from the database server. I don't know if that's the way how you usually do it, but yeah, it just sounded like a great decision to me. So these 2 virtual machines run most of the critical applications in my HomeLab stack that I always want to have up and running. And the secondary Proxmox node, PRX Pro 2, is mainly there for experimental workloads that I don't always have running. For example, this is running my LXC Production 1 container, which is running my AI workload, so we'll also talk about it later. But there I'm also running my server Prod 3, 4, 5, and 6, which together form a Kubernetes cluster that I'm honestly currently not using anymore for any critical workloads. So that's why I moved these 4 production servers to the secondary Proxmox node, because it doesn't matter to me if I shut it down. And of course, this is also running some of the testing servers that I mostly use for researching new deployments or testing configs, or sometimes even temporary stuff like when I'm recording a new tutorial. So you can see Proxmox is definitely one of the most important components for my HomeLab stack. And as you can imagine, for all of the actual servers like the virtual machines or Proxmox, but also some of the physical devices like the Raspberry Pis I'm running, I'm mainly using a Linux operating system, and my preferred Linux distro is Ubuntu Server. I just got used to Ubuntu many years ago because it was one of the first Linux distros that I tried, and it was one of the first that simplified many things back in these days where some of the older Linux distributions were kind of hard and complicated. And over time, I think Ubuntu definitely has become a mature and widely used Linux distro for servers as well. You can definitely say today Ubuntu is one of the most prominent Linux distributions in the world. And the advantage this has is that you find a lot of information, tutorials, and content for it if you have a problem. And most of the applications that I've written for a Linux operating system are almost all running on Ubuntu. It also has some newer package versions like many of the other server distros, for example Debian, but still Ubuntu also has LTS versions that are long time supported, which I think offers a good balance between being up to date, but also using stable versions. I know some people might not like Ubuntu and everybody has their own favorite Linux distribution, but honestly, guys, I don't care. I'm not really an emotionally attached Linux user. So from time to time, I'll just try out other distros as well and see how they work. But Ubuntu is the one that I definitely feel the most comfortable with. Alright guys, so now let's quickly move to the next topic. As you might have seen in the HomeLab 2, I'm also running a big storage server where I'm storing all of my video projects, the files, the backups for the applications and VMs. And here I'm using the Unraid operating system. And I realized in some of the videos that I've done about Unraid that it seems to be some kind of controversial system as well, because many people told me that it isn't a great operating system. Some of you might prefer other systems like TrueNAS or Open Media Vault, but well, look, yeah, with all of these HomeLab projects, you have to accept that not everybody's using your favorite tool or operating system. This is just because in tech there are millions of possibilities for how to accomplish things, and they are all somehow right or wrong. I can just tell you about my particular use case. There were mainly two advantages the Unraid platform has over other systems that convinced me to use it. And the first one is that Unraid boots from a USB drive. So that means in small environments, especially when you're using motherboards that don't have so many PCI Express slots, you can save one M2 slot that you typically would use for an NVMe drive that would contain the operating system. Because Unraid is booting from a USB drive, you can use that M2 slot for an additional controller card or any other device. This gives you, in my opinion, more possibilities for connecting additional hard drives or adding another network interface card. And the second advantage was the Unraid array. So this is a proprietary array solution that Unraid has, and I've not seen anything else like that in other systems. I already explained in my Unraid storage server video why I love this Unraid array so much, but to quickly summarize, this gives me the ability to build a large redundant cold storage pool that I can use for backups, archive storage, or storing large video files, and it has the ability to spin down the disks that are not in use, so they don't consume any power, and that means you can build a more power-efficient storage server. I agree that Unraid probably isn't the most mature NAS operating system in the world, and many people dislike its pricing and licensing policy, but I think for a HomeLab power user like me, Unraid has some pretty compelling and interesting features, and this is the reason why I'm using it. Okay, so now let's move on to the next category, container orchestration. As you can imagine, the first item on the list is also extremely important to me. Docker is the main containerization technology or platform, whatever you want to call it, that I'm using on my server Prod 1, 2, and also some of the other testing servers. I'm using Docker because it is super easy and simple to manage. I absolutely love Docker Compose. That's also why I'm showing it in all of my tutorials, because when I explain something to you, it will definitely work on your machine the same way like it does on mine, which is amazing for making video tutorials. However, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement here on this setup. For example, I never tried out Docker Swarm, and I think this would become very interesting when I'm migrating containers from one Docker host to another. Currently, for example, I have the problem that I have too many Docker hosts across my entire HomeLab. So I'm running many virtual machines on the Proxmox nodes that are using Docker. I'm running 2 separate Zima boards that run Docker projects. I also have some testing servers with the Docker engine. So that means when I want to do load balancing with this setup, I'm using a reverse proxy or using authentication with Authentic. I have to deploy these type of endpoints to each and every Docker host, which is really kind of annoying. And I believe using something like a Docker overlay network in Docker Swarm would definitely help me to solve this problem. But I haven't fully researched this topic yet, so it will take some time. Maybe by the end of this year, I will just have a look at Docker Swarm and see how it could help me to improve the architecture. But either way, Docker will continue to be a super important topic to me. And you can trust me, there's a lot of content coming out related to this. By the way, when we're talking about Docker Swarm and high availability, of course, we also have to talk about Kubernetes. And that's why I also started to look into K3s, which is a simple, lightweight, and fast Kubernetes platform. I know there are also, again, other possibilities how to do it, but still K3s seems to be my favorite system that I tried out so far. So I'm running a Kubernetes cluster on the server production 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is kind of an old legacy deployment that I'm not actively using anymore. The secondary K3s Kubernetes cluster is my actual primary one, which is currently running on my Raspberry Pi cluster. Again, as I said in my HomeLab video, I'm not really happy with the hardware decisions on that, so I think it would be better to deploy this on a few other virtual machines and replace this entire Raspberry Pi cluster. But yeah, now that I have it, I'm just gonna keep using it. And I also migrated some of the workloads to this Kubernetes cluster. For example, I just deployed Authentic, my main identity provider, we'll also cover later in this video, on this Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster. And so far, it's just been running great. And I also plan to migrate some of the monitoring and logging stack like Prometheus, Grafana. We'll also go through this to Kubernetes as well, somewhere maybe later this year or maybe even the next year. So you can see Kubernetes will continue to play an important part in some of my future videos. However, I need to focus on so many other projects and Kubernetes doesn't seem to be the most important one, at least when you take a look at the YouTube statistics, how well these videos perform. And most of my tutorials will, of course, be focused on Docker Compose. But I think once you are familiar with an app or service, and I've done several videos on it, I think it would be nice to make just an additional video on Kubernetes-focused deployments. But we'll see, because Kubernetes is a beast on its own, yeah. For example, one thing that was initially so complicated to me in Kubernetes was how to handle storage. And this particularly became a huge problem when I was building the new Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster, because Raspberry Pis, they don't have a super fast network connection to an NFS server. And I wanted to have some independent, redundant, and high available storage solution with a backup function. And that's why I also use Longhorn. So this is honestly the perfect solution for all of this stuff. But again, I won't go into too much detail here because I've made just one separate video about Longhorn, but it's like the backbone of my Kubernetes storage when I'm deploying apps there. Also, as most of you guys will know, I'm using Traffic, my absolutely favorite reverse proxy on Docker and Kubernetes. This handles all the TLS connections and the certificates for my Docker host. And whenever I'm using Traffic on Kubernetes, I'm also combining this with Cert Manager so that Cert Manager is taking care of managing the TLS certificates on Kubernetes. And these two applications really do a phenomenal job. I just like the way how you manage traffic, for example, because you don't have any web UI where you need to click some stuff to configure it. It's all defined in the same Docker Compose project file where you deploy the application, or in simple Kubernetes manifests that you just store and ship with the application deployment, which is perfect for automated deployment like CI/CD pipelines and stuff we will also talk later about. I agree that you have to go through some of trial and error in the first time when you're using Traffic, and it might be a bit difficult for beginners, but once you understand how to configure everything in Traffic and you build your main templates for all of the deployments and configs, I think it's so easy to just repeat this stuff. Yeah, you can copy the templates, use it in other projects, just change a few lines in the Compose project, and then you're done. Almost every time when I make a Docker tutorial and there is some sort of Incoming connection required. I also include traffic in this tutorial. And sure, like with any other solution that I'm covering, I also get a lot of comments from people recommending other programs like Caddy, HA Proxy, or some even still recommend Nginx Proxy Manager for whatever reason. But I can just tell you guys, well, fine if you're using something else, but for me personally, traffic and also Cert Manager just works perfectly. There's no reason for me to change this setup, and that's why I'm also including this in all of my tutorials. Okay guys, so now let's get from containerization and TLS management to smart home in IoT. So you can see this doesn't really follow a logical order. But anyways, so here I only have one service application that I'm currently using in my HomeLab, which is Home Assistant. And this is absolutely, at least in my opinion, the best application for smart home because it's open source, it's free, and you can connect so many different vendors, brands, and devices to the system. It's nearly unbelievable. I'm currently doing some interesting stuff with Home Assistant for my smart home and IoT automation, but honestly, I'm not really an expert yet, so I'm still learning how to use it, and this is also part of the reason why I haven't created so many YouTube tutorials around Home Assistant. Also, I believe there's already so much content about IoT and smart home existing on YouTube, and this is certainly some sort of different field and not related to the typical type of audience that I want to address with my channel. So you will only occasionally see the one or another Home Assistant tutorial when I have something really exciting to share with you guys. But of course, it is another critical application and system that I need for smart home automation. Alright, so next we have network management, also a huge topic on its own that could fill an entire video. But I just want to talk quickly about the free Sophos technologies that you see here on this list, because some of you have asked in my last video about the HomeLab tour, why the heck did I choose Sophos as a system and not something like OpenSense or Unify? Look, Sophos is an enterprise-grade security vendor, and Sophos offers many different products, including the Sophos XG firewall, which controls and secures all of my network traffic. Then I'm using a big Sophos switch that is connecting everything, and I'm also using Sophos wireless access points. And I agree, these type of devices are a lot more expensive than regular consumer hardware, especially with all of the business licensing stuff and so on. So this is not a system that I would typically see in a home environment. But the one and only reason I'm using Sophos is that I work for this company, so besides my YouTube channel. And of course, that comes with the privilege of getting access to some of the devices and tools for testing. And because I just love to work with the products at work, I'm using them in my HomeLab as well. It's just a no-brainer for me. Though it is probably not what I'd recommend to every HomeLab user, because the hardware appliances that I'm using are extremely oversized for HomeLab environments, and they require, again, additional licensing. But for me, as test appliances that I get from my company and I need it for work anyway, they are super useful. So I don't want to go into too much detail here on Sophos because I explained a lot of the network architecture in my last HomeLab tour video, so you can easily refer to that. But Sophos, again, is a huge component in my HomeLab stack that controls a lot of the network environment. Okay, so still I want to go in a bit more detail over one item in this category, and this is the Bind9 DNS server. So the reason why I have decided to use Bind9 is that it's one of these technologies that you often see in professional and large environments. And I thought it would be nice to use it and learn how to administer such a DNS server from the ground up, instead of using something more simple like Pi-hole, for example, where you just go through a graphical user interface and click a few buttons. Bind9 is a bit harder to configure, but it also forces me to learn more about DNS and understand what is an authoritative DNS server, what is a name server, what is a DNS zone, and how to configure all of these technologies. So Bind9 is not really a software that I choose for convenience, it's actually the opposite. And I'm also managing a lot of these configurations using other automation tools that make it a bit easier for me to keep track of everything, but we will go through automation later. Just know that, yeah, Bind9 is the primary DNS technology that I'm using. Maybe I'm also switching that technology now once I've learned how to configure a DNS server to something more simple in the future, but well, I haven't fully decided on this yet, so this is probably a project for next year or so. But yeah, that's it about networking. Let's go on to the next category, monitoring. Oh, guys, I'm just realizing this will become a super exhausting and long video, but yeah, I hope it interests you, so stay tuned. If you can make it until the end, please let me know in the comments, by the way. Okay, so let's just move on. First, I'd like to discuss the Prometheus, Loki, and Grafana stacks. You can see this really as one big topic, even though there are actually 3 different applications. First one, Prometheus, is a metrics database. This is where I'm storing time series data and data points that measure over time things like CPU usage, memory usage, and disk utilization. And I'm currently using this on mainly all of my servers and infrastructure, and certainly also the containers. It is super important to me because it gives me an in-depth view of my machine's performance and statistics, allowing me to find out when resources are exhausted. So when I need to resize machines, like when I need to increase the disk size or the memory on some of the Docker hosts, for example. Then we also have Grafana Loki, a similar application to Prometheus, but instead it is for logs. So this is another critical component in troubleshooting and finding out when something is not working. For example, it's collecting and aggregating all of the logs from my container deployments, but also the Linux virtual machines. So whenever something goes wrong with my containers and I have to drill into the log files, why something is not behaving in the way I expected it, Grafana Loki is the backbone, like the database storage for all of these logs. By the way, this is also where Grafana comes into play, because Grafana, the third component, is really the visual interface to inspect and explore all of these metrics and logs. So you can see Loki and Prometheus as the database backend and Grafana as the graphical user interface for these applications. I've also recently worked on a super interesting topic at Sophos, by the way, where I needed Grafana and Prometheus for. So learning these monitoring technologies was not only a super fun project for my HomeLab to learn, it also helped me to work on a project at my main job that I would never have worked on if I hadn't learned this stuff in my HomeLab before. So you can see how important HomeLab projects will get for your main IT career. Furthermore, this certainly becomes another critical component for future videos, because I have barely touched on topics like alerting and notification. I haven't connected this to Kubernetes yet, so there are some great opportunities that I will try to work on in the next months, but maybe by the end of this year, so don't expect that in the near future. Also, in addition to the monitoring stack with Prometheus, Loki, and Grafana, I recently added a new component, or at least to me it was kind of new, called CheckMK. So this is another beast on its own, but it provides me some particularly interesting functions that I couldn't easily do with Prometheus or Loki yet. So actually, there isn't much I want to say at this point here about it, because CheckMK, I've done a full video tutorial on it recently, and I'm also currently planning and working on the Ansible collection on CheckMK, so I definitely heard all of the comments under my CheckMK video. You guys want to see an Ansible video about CheckMK, so you'll get it, but I just need some more time to prepare, so please stay tuned. But yeah, these 4 applications currently build my monitoring stack, and I think you can really do a lot with these tools. Alright, so then we also have Uptime Kuma in this category, which is also a monitoring application, but a much smaller and honestly less capable one. It's not monitoring any metrics, performance statistics, or logs. It's just there to tell you if a service is up and running, and it can notify you if a service goes down, which might already be enough for many people to monitor. And it has served me quite well for some time, but I'm currently thinking about replacing Uptime Kuma with CheckMK, because CheckMK can literally do anything that Uptime Kuma does, but also many other things as well. So I still want to keep Uptime Kuma in my HomeLab, at least for testing and just to see how the project progresses, because I know it's loved by many HomeLab enthusiasts, and it's honestly a great tool if you just want to have a simple uptime monitoring. So that's why I just keep it running, because I want to keep an eye on it. But of course, I'm not actively using this for any alerts anymore when I'm using CheckMK. Alright, so that's it about monitoring. Let's move on to the next block, AI. And I don't want to go too much into AI, because I've made also separate videos on it, and honestly, I'm kind of still new in this field. There are so many things I don't understand about AI and that I have to learn, but it is becoming a huge new skill in tech. And I think if you're in a current tech role, you have to have at least some high-level understanding of AI and know how to use it properly. And I'm also hearing a lot about AI at my main job at Sophos. Especially in cybersecurity, AI offers so many interesting capabilities and possibilities to protect IT infrastructure and systems. Also in automation, it will become relevant in the future. Of course, I'm not the one who thinks that AI will replace humans entirely, and I absolutely hate all this shitty AI-related content. I'm not the one who's jumping on every hype wagon, yeah, you know me guys. But I think there are certainly some topics that could be interesting to cover on this channel. Maybe I'll do some future projects about Python TensorFlow, or maybe do some AI automation stuff with Ollama and OpenWebUI. So Ollama, by the way, is the platform that allows me to run local LLMs at home. I'm running this on my secondary Proxmox node, so where the big AMD Radeon graphics card is plugged in. And I use OpenWebUI as the main graphical interface to communicate with the Ollama platform. I'm using it for text generation research. I'm using this for code review and code improvements. I've also connected Ollama to VS Code for code completion and code refactoring. It's super cool. Again, I think AI is an area that has so much potential, but I think I have to also be careful with content creation around it because there's so much bullshit out there already. And when I make something, I want to do it right. So that's why you probably would see occasionally the one or another AI related video. Alright guys, so we're getting along. We'll walk our way through this list here. Now, the next big topic in my HomeLab is automation. And automation is such an interesting and exciting topic, at least for me. So the first two tools that I'm using here, Ansible and OpenTofu, connect many dots in my entire HomeLab environment. For example, I'm using Ansible as my main configuration management tool. So this is helping me a lot with the maintenance, configuration, and installation tasks in my HomeLab. For example, I've created a repository with separate playbooks that install certain core services. I also created other playbooks to update all the packages on my Ubuntu servers and Proxmox nodes, or upload public SSH keys and manage user accounts. And there are certainly so much more I could do with Ansible. I think at some point I just need to dive a little deeper into Ansible and learn how to use roles and other plugins to accomplish more tasks with it. Now, let's come to the next tool here, OpenTofu. This is another automation tool similar to Ansible, but it does a few important things slightly different. And previously, I always used Terraform, which was created by HashiCorp, and once HashiCorp changed their open source licensing to a business source licensing, I later on switched to OpenTofu, but actually OpenTofu and Terraform are mostly even in the way they work. So I heavily use OpenTofu for provisioning tasks. So whenever I need additional resources in my HomeLab, I would have to create them manually through a web UI or config files. Then I used an OpenTofu or Terraform plugin to create these resources and define them in code files. Just a quick example, if I need a new virtual machine on Proxmox, or I need a new DNS record, or maybe I need both, I define these things in a Terraform file, and then I use the OpenTofu automation tool to automatically apply these changes and make them happen on my infrastructure. And this has the huge advantage of that you always have a single source of truth of what's configured and provisioned on your infrastructure in a simple code file. So if you want to find out what's going on, you don't have to log into any web UI and click through graphical user interfaces to find out what you have done. You can just simply read it in the code. And this is, in my opinion, much easier and simpler to use. So these two automation tools, Ansible and OpenTofu, become even better when they're combined with other logical and pipeline tools. For example, Kestra is such a tool that I use to schedule certain automation tasks. So there are simple scripts in Kestra that are triggered on specific events. For example, when something gets updated in a Git repository, or when I invoke it through a webhook call. So then I can execute some actions, often by using Ansible or Terraform or OpenTofu scripts. And this is really super cool. I know this is tough to explain in just a minute or two, but just to show you a very quick example. So I have created a scheduled pipeline in Kestra that will automatically run every day at a specific time. And this will download an Ansible playbook from one of my Git repositories, and then it just runs it in a simple Ansible container. And in this Ansible playbook, I have defined an action that will automatically purge some of my orphaned Docker images on my servers. And that is solving a big problem that I had, because whenever I was updating container images, the old images are still left on the server's disks. And over time, they take up so much space that the virtual machine disks get completely full, resulting in the server to crash or to stop working. And that's why I regularly run this simple Ansible playbook every day to clean up the old images on my Docker hosts. It is a very simple use case, but it caused a lot of problems in the past for me. And by combining all these automation tools, Kestra, Ansible, and I also have done the same for Terraform tasks, this is really automating a lot of the critical workloads that I would have to do manually in the HomeLab. So it's really saving a lot of time. However, I have to admit, the only problem that I sometimes have with Kestra is that it is using its own declarative language. So it has some special functions, and in some of the early versions, they really changed a lot of the syntax back and forth. So it has some sort of a learning curve, especially when you try to write some more complex logic inside a Kestra automation flow. You have to learn these functions, the syntax, and how to use this tool. And the free and open source version of Kestra also doesn't have all of the features that I would personally love to use, like a secret store or the new application feature. There are some cool things in it, but unfortunately locked behind the enterprise version. But it's still a pretty versatile tool that I probably have to use more in the future. Semaphore UI, by the way, is also a similar thing like Kestra. It is a bit simpler and has fewer capabilities and functionalities. That's why I personally am not actively using Semaphore UI anymore. I just have it in my stack because if something changes, if they introduce new exciting features, of course, I want to keep up to date with it, and I might do another video about it. So just like in Kestra, you can use it to accomplish similar things like running a Terraform automation pipeline that is scheduled or triggered by certain actions. You can even run Python scripts and Ansible playbooks. But the problem with Semaphore UI is that it's more like a wipe UI to just execute one script at a time or at a specific event. It's not like Kestra, where you can define a more complex logic and create your own scripts inside these automation pipelines. So I think Semaphore UI is a nice automation tool, but Kestra is certainly much more powerful, even the open source version of it. However, both tools also certainly compete with another automation platform in my HomeLab, and I'm still not sure which tool would be my favorite here, Kestra or this one. But of course, I'm talking about my code management platform, GitLab. And yeah, it is in the category code management, but GitLab is honestly much more than a code management platform, even though code management is really the primary use case of it. So that's why I put it into this category. So in GitLab, I'm managing all of my deployments, the configurations, and the automations of my HomeLab in certain projects or repositories. Previously, I made a lot of this stuff publicly available on GitHub, so you guys could look into my GitHub repositories and find out what I'm running and how exactly I'm running it. However, I replaced the public GitHub repository of my HomeLab in favor of my new self-hosted GitLab instance, because I just like the idea of keeping everything in my private environment a little more. Because GitLab offers a super cool automation platform called GitLab CI/CD that I started to explore recently. And this already handles a lot of my automation logic for my application deployments. For example, you can see I've created a Git repository for most of the video projects and tools that I use in my HomeLab. For instance, if you just go into my DNS repository, so here you will find the Docker Compose project for my Bind9 DNS server that I'm using on one of my Docker hosts, as well as the CI/CD pipelines that will automatically deploy the container or apply changes when I made an update to the Compose file, or another job that applies changes in the Terraform files to the production configuration. Again, I explained that I'm managing my DNS records with OpenTofu in simple Terraform files. And the cool thing is, when I now want to add a new DNS record, I change it in the code and I push this to my GitLab repository. It automatically triggers the CI/CD pipeline that will use a simple OpenTofu container to make these changes happening. So by the combination of OpenTofu and GitLab CI/CD, I can literally automate everything. And when I need new resources in my HomeLab, I just have to make a simple change in a code file, push it, and the automation tools are automatically doing this and applying these configurations for me. So yeah, just stay tuned for more videos about these kind of topics. I think there's some really good potential to show you some really cool stuff. By the way, when we were talking about the Docker Compose project automation, I also shouldn't forget to talk about Renovate, because Renovate, especially in combination with GitLab CI/CD, has completely simplified the entire container deployment for me, and certainly also Kubernetes, because Renovate automatically notifies you whenever a new version of a container image is pushed to the registry, and it automatically creates a new pull request on GitLab. For example, if there is an update onto the traffic reverse proxy container images, Renovate will automatically create this pull request with that version change to the GitLab management platform. So I can just simply click on merge to apply these changes. And guess what's now happening? Of course, because I'm using GitLab CI/CD automation, that now automatically triggers a new job that uploads this new compose file with the updated container image to my remote server, restarts the container, and then my application is updated. So this allows me to completely automate all of the versioning, so I don't have to know, or I don't need to look whenever there's a new version of an application released. I just get a notification for it, but I still have some manual control over when I want to definitely make this update happen, because there are other automation tools like, for example, Watchtower, that I covered some time in the past, but they do that on their own. So if there is a new container image, Watchtower will just restart the container, and maybe that's not what you want, especially in a production environment. You don't want an application to be restarted in the middle of a critical process. So I think for these type of version updates, you have to have some manual control over it, and with GitLab CI/CD and Renovate, you can really simplify and automate this entire process while still having some manual control over when things are going to happen. So this is super cool. But I'm also running another small Git platform in my HomeLab called Git-T. So this is, again, similar to GitLab, but in a much smaller scale. So the reason why I'm using the GitLab over Git-T is GitLab has more features than Git-T, because it is better integrated with Renovate, and it has more capabilities when it comes to CI/CD and these type of things. So that's mainly the reason. But of course, I still keep it running in my HomeLab because I want to keep track of any changes or future versions of Git-T, and maybe it's getting improved and it's worth making another video, so that's why I still keep it deployed. Okay, so as you've heard, I'm pretty excited about automation and code management in my HomeLab. So the next topics we can go over quickly here, because app and server management, I'm honestly not heavily interested anymore, even though there are really some nice projects in the stack. For example, Portainer, that allows you to manage Docker deployments or Kubernetes in a simple and easy way. I completely replaced it with my GitLab CI/CD automation workflow, Renovate, and so on, for all of the reasons I just explained. And the same is also true for Doc, which is another small hobby project, I would call it. Similar to Portainer, but just for Docker Compose and less capable. Again, although I definitely see a target audience for these type of management tools, I'm certainly not one of them, because I really prefer to define all of my deployments in a declarative way, which means I love to work with Docker Compose or tools like Terraform, GitLab CI/CD, Ansible. I don't need another graphical program and do all this stuff manually. I mean, that's the whole reason why I'm using this massive automation stack, that I don't have to do it in a graphical user interface. So that is somehow against the use case of management tools. But I totally understand that there are a lot of people that have HomeLabs and they're not willing to jump into these complicated automation topics, CI/CD, Renovate, Terraform, Ansible, Orchestra, and all of these other automation tools. You just want a simple management UI for deploying a few self-hosted container images. And for these type of use cases, Portainer is great, Doc is great, and that's why I certainly keep an eye on them. And when there is a new exciting feature released, maybe I'll do another video, but just know that I'm not heavily using this. And the same is also somehow true of Homepage, which is a nice HomeLab dashboard. Again, I love this project, but I'm honestly not regularly using it because it doesn't really solve an actual problem for me. It is nice to have some graphical representation of each and everything that you have deployed in HomeLab, but why do I need another graphical representation when I have it in code or when I have created a documentation? So I really love to work more with code files and proper documentation than having another dashboard. But again, I might not be the right type of audience for these type of projects. Maybe occasionally do the one or another video of these type of topics if you're interested in it. But yeah, that's it about management tools. Let's not spend too much time on it. Let's quickly go through databases. Yeah, I also run a few databases in my HomeLab stack. What a surprise. But honestly, to me at least, this is a kind of boring topic. I don't run these databases like MariaDB, Postgres, or Influx because I like them so much and I'm excited about them, but because I have to. Yeah, many other applications just require a database to be running in the background, so that's why I'm running MariaDB and Postgres. InfluxDB actually serves just one particular use case. It is a metric store for my Proxmox monitoring because Proxmox doesn't support something like Prometheus. So when I want to see some fancy statistics and metrics about my Proxmox instance in Grafana, the data is coming from InfluxDB, and that's basically it. What I definitely want to spend a little more time on is the last category, which might be more interesting than databases. This is security and identity, especially the first topic, WASA. So this is a really nice XDR and CM platform. So extended detection and response and security information and event management. And yes, I knew that out of my head. I didn't need to read it. And I know this platform might seem like a little overkill for a simple HomeLab, and it certainly is, but it is another puzzle piece that I often need for work. Not the WASA platform in particular, because as you might know, Sophos has also kind of an XDR and even MDR and cloud platform called Sophos Central, but it really helps me to keep WASA in my HomeLab to get some sort of general understanding of how these type of technologies work and what they actually do. Because I cannot deploy something like Sophos Central or Sophos MDR in my HomeLab. This is a proprietary closed source cloud service application. But just to follow some of these discussions at work that I'm having about XDR, CM, MDR, and these type of things, I think it is important to familiarize yourself with these type of services, and that's the main reason why I'm using WASA at home, because it is open source, it is free, and I can use this to practice and learn about managed security. This is, by the way, also the main reason why I'm using ClamAV in my HomeLab, not because I think ClamAV is better than Sophos Endpoint. Certainly, it's the other way around. Sophos is much better than the free and open source ClamAV. But if you learn how to install and set up these open source technologies from the ground up, this is certainly teaching you a lot about the technology. By the way, I would also love to add another topic to this list here called Suricata. So this also will become a super important topic for me at work sometimes later this year. Maybe it would be a nice addition to this list and worth a video, but we will see. I don't want to talk too much about it because that's somewhere by the end of the next year. Alright, so now the next item on the list that I certainly will talk a lot more about is TwinGate. TwinGate, my main remote access tool. Actually, remote access tool doesn't describe it correctly because it's more than that. It's a full ZTNA solution, a Zero Trust Network Access solution. This means it is in contrast to traditional VPNs much more secure because it doesn't only include the encrypted network part, it also does the policy and compliance checks on all the connected devices. And you can really fine-tune what user, what device, and in which compliance state has access to what particular service. Of course, there are also other great remote access tools that do kind of similar things, and I've reviewed a couple of them here on this channel as well. But TwinGate just keeps to be my favorite solution for remote access and ZTNA because it has been super reliable to me. It never had any problems or outages. It just works on all of my devices. It is super easy to install and manage. And it also supports configuration and management through infrastructure as code, IAC automation tools. Again, Terraform, OpenTofu, Ansible. That makes it a very comfortable solution for me and fits great into my stack with all of the automation tools. And it also has, among the other tools, a pretty compelling feature set, even in the free tier. So that's why I'm mainly using TwinGate whenever I need to remotely log into my HomeLab stack or get access to certain applications. I also absolutely love the next item on the list, that is Authentic, and this is an identity provider. which replaces a lot of different authentication services like LDAP, Active Directory, OpenID Connect, and it allows you to have a centralized user management in one single solution that you can integrate in many other applications. For example, I've integrated Authentic to log into my GitLab platform or my Portainer instance. So instead of having to manage different users and different credentials in all of these other applications separately, I can centralize everything, and it comes with a lot of advanced features to increase the security of your logins. Like it supports passwordless authentication, it supports two-factor authentication with one-time passwords. By using Authentic as an identity provider and a login method to other applications, you can basically add passwordless and MFA to any application that you like. It's super cool. Even the ones that don't have a login form by themselves, because you can easily also integrate this in traffic reverse proxy to securely expose any application that you like. And it also allows me to have a secure machine-to-machine authentication. I have used this for something like the Castra webhooks or automation pipelines, or even the network-wide access to something like Olama. It is super cool and a super important puzzle piece for my HomeLab security. But again, I could go on and talk about this for an hour, but I don't want to. So definitely watch my separate videos about Authentic, because I also want to cover the next item on the list, Cloudflare, another important puzzle piece, because this is my main public DNS provider and security gateway, which means all of my certificates that are issued by Let's Encrypt use a DNS challenge, and that is managed by Cloudflare. Without that, I wouldn't be able to issue TLS certificates for my traffic reverse proxies and so on. And I'm also managing all of my public DNS records with it. Of course, I'm not managing them in the Cloudflare web UI. I also use the Cloudflare Terraform provider to configure all of these things in infrastructure as code. And I'm also sometimes using Cloudflare tunnels for some very specific things. Cloudflare tunnels, by the way, is another feature of the Cloudflare ZTNA platform. So this is a competitive service to TwinGate. But I see them as two separate things here, because TwinGate is mostly there for providing access to internal resources to managed users. Like you have to log into TwinGate, you have to authenticate and get access to it. With Cloudflare tunnels, you can securely publish a service using ZTNA, but to any unauthenticated users as well, so to the public internet. And this is the way how I'm protecting some of the webhook endpoints in my local network that need to be accessed from other public API endpoints. So when I need to publish an internal service, but put it behind a strong authentication and protection, I'm using Cloudflare tunnels to do that. And certainly, besides that, it also handles the important DNS part, the certificates, and so on. So Cloudflare, super important. Last but not least, I also have a small instance of Passport in my HomeLab, which is a self-hosted password manager. So I'm currently not actively using this for my private passwords. First of all, I don't like to have my important private passwords and credentials in a self-hosted environment, because whenever something happens to my HomeLab rack, well, I would be screwed. So that's why I mainly use Apple passwords. It is better integrated into my Apple devices and it's automatically synchronized. I can easily share it with my wife and my son. So that's the reason for private things. I'm not using a self-hosted password manager. But I think where Passport is super useful for, this is really great for storing credentials in a self-hosted environment. It's super secure by design, and it's great to share credentials or secrets in a team or company, especially the latest version of Passport 5, which was recently released. By the way, I'm also preparing a new video about Passport version 5 with some of the cool new features that it comes with, like encrypted metadata, not only for passwords, but also user accounts, URIs, and nodes are encrypted and secured. And they're also working on some pretty cool features like a key value store as well. And I think for these type of use cases, a self-hosted password manager is great. So to use this as a credential management system for your HomeLab. So if you need to store the user login for your Proxmox node or the API token for automation, webhook tokens, and these type of things, that's what Apple Passport is not really great for. And Passport is much better for these type of things. But yeah, that's mainly it. This is my entire HomeLab stack so far. And of course, it isn't all that I'm planning. I want to add a couple of more items to that list here that will make great future videos, but you have to be a little patient with me researching all that projects requires a lot of time. So therefore it would be cool if you consider helping me out a little by checking out the Patreon or YouTube membership program that allows me to continue making all of these free tutorials and videos for you, even if they are exhausting and long like this one here. But yeah, I'm really done for today, guys. But yeah, if you have new project ideas for me, maybe another HomeLab tool that I definitely should take a look at, please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Congratulations, you've made it to the end. And of course, I'm gonna catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.